All right. It is Star Wars Day. May the fourth be with you, everyone.
And also
Welcome.
with you.
Thank you. All right. Welcome to another edition of SacPy. It's May 4th, 2023. SacPy Online has been going for over 3 years now, and it's been fun to see how things expand. I see a lot of new faces in here, but all hail our original face, the founder, Joshua Miller. Tried to get him in again. He was excited that SacPy continues on and continues to get awesome guests. And we're pretty excited about tonight's edition. All right, on to the main event tonight. Tonight we are honored to offer the presence of Anna Ravenscroft and Alex Martelli, two of the authors of Python in a Nutshell, 4th edition. Alex got that series going quite some time ago. These two are some of the largest contributors in the Python community space. And once again, I can't thank you enough for showing up. Really excited to hear what they have prepared for us. They've got a little bit of a presentation, and then we're gonna do a Q&A. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to you two. And once again, thanks for showing up. Can't wait to hear what you got for us.
Okay. So let's see if I can share screen.
You should be able to now.
It should work. I sure hope so. And let's go to there. It looks like it worked. Hooray. All right. So Alex and I are going to talk about writing Python in a nutshell together. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a few of our favorite things that we came across or learned as we were writing it. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. And by the way, we do have a discount code for buying the book if you want to buy our book. So Alex, can you talk about how you ended up writing the 1st edition?
Sure. A little bit more than 20 years ago, I had discovered this almost unknown language and started loving it at first use, and got very active on the Usenet group where people were discussing it and asking questions.
That was Counseling Python?
Yep. Apparently, I had something of a gift for answering questions to the point that one of the most senior member of the community, Steve Holden, named me the Martelli bot. The concept of identifying a few posters as bots predates me. The first two were Tim Peters, known as the Timbot, and Fredrik Lund, unfortunately now the late Fredrik Lund, known as the F-Bot. I was the third one and nicknamed the Martelli bot. I loved it so much, and it didn't have the crucial bit, a really good book about it. Specifically, O'Reilly Nutshell book was, in my view, what makes a language like officially a language. So I got in touch with O'Reilly, got a recommendation from all over the community, including Guido, and finally got the assignment of writing Python in a nutshell. And it was published 20 years ago to the day.
Oh yeah, 2003, 20 years ago. Yeah, exactly. And Alex and I were getting back together about that time because I was learning Python and saw his name everywhere. And I knew him from back in Usenet back in '94. So I emailed him and we ended up getting to know each other, and long story short, we ended up getting married. We have the Zen of Python was one of the readings at our wedding. And I helped with the second edition of the Nutshell, mostly as a technical reviewer. And then for a long time, there wasn't another edition. And finally, O'Reilly talked us into it. But because Alex wasn't using Python 3 at work yet and didn't really want to write about something he didn't feel familiar with from like using in the wild, we brought in Steve Holden as a co-author. And the book kind of became like not just a coconut shell, but like a steamer trunk, because we had to cover both 2.7 and the 3.5 by that time, and migrating from 2.7 to 3.5. And it just was far too large. And so our goal for the fourth edition was to slim it down at least a little bit. And we did manage. It's only 735 pages now. And we also brought along a fourth author, Paul McGuire, and he was very helpful with the writing and keeping things organized. So Alex and I are here in Sunnyvale. Paul is in Austin, Texas, and Steve lives near London in Britain. So with, all of us in very different places. Oh, and of course it was during the pandemic. So we ended up collaborating with using, of course, Alex works at Google. So we use all the Google work stuff, Google spreadsheets. We had multiple ones, and we had weekly meetings on Google Meets. We had to try and find a time that would work for all of us with the different places. It usually ended up around lunchtime for Alex and I, and after dinner for Steve. And then collaborating on, we actually wrote it in Google Docs because we were able to write it and collaborate on it easily. We did manage to beat our deadlines a couple of times, not just meeting them. Our editor was a bit surprised, I think. They commented that it isn't very often that they have authors actually sending in the materials ahead of the deadline. We did have one of our meetings was all about typography. And what I mean by that is, should it be italics or bold, or which font should the commas that are inside code, should they be code font or not? And it's like, if they're part of the code, they need to be code font. So we, but we had to figure out how to make it seem like one book, not just 4 different authors writing random voice. So we worked hard on that. I think all of us read through every single page like 8 different times over the course of the year. Luckily, we all agreed on Oxford commas and active voice. Alex would go through and delete and reword anything that was passive voice. Alex, we have a bad memory of that, right? From working on the cookbook. You want to tell about it?
Yeah, the Python cookbook, we wrote the second edition together a while ago, and the for reasons that escape me, O'Reilly's production process were in a bit of a mess at the time. So the whole thing was given to a copy editor who copy edited it without understanding anything about the subjects we were discussing.
Right.
And one thing that will remain etched in our memory forever is, so we had one case, one recipe, in which we deliberately used a much simpler but not optimally efficient algorithm. And so we explained there are better algorithms, but this one is very simple. The copy editor rephrased it as algorithms are better.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And this one
That's
is very simple.
at that point we were living in Italy and we made them O'Reilly FedEx the huge like reams of paper of the galley proof to us in Italy so that we could go through, figure out what all the editor, copy editor, and I use that phrase well, guardedly, what all she supposedly fixed and then went back and corrected it back to what it should have been. This time we had an amazing copy editor. Rachel had absolutely rocked. And in fact, she was so good that she even in the process of copy editing found some technical errors that not just the 4 authors, but the tech reviewers had also missed. So if the book is good, she's part of the reason that it's actually technically accurate, as well as accurate English and all of the other proofreading type stuff. So we had some hard decisions
before we leave, Anna, before we leave that slide, yes, one observation I want to do is the concept of actively fighting against passives is my way of honoring the O'Reilly editor I had on the very first edition of Python in a Nutshell, Laura Lewin. She really showed me how and why passive voices are the enemy of clear understanding in English. Italian is different, and that's my native language. My second language is French, and so English is my third language. And in English in particular, passives are stuff that gets used in very specific context. For example, you say something like errors were made to avoid saying who made any error.
Right.
Like a very bureaucratic thing.
Right.
So my motto since then has been passives must be avoided.
Right.
Okay, you're right. I actually had to insist, especially with our British co-author, the Briton, because he kept slipping into passives, which apparently are more common in British English than American English.
It's also very common in academic and formal writing. So it's easy to fall into that habit. So thank you, Alex, for going through.
To avoid very frequent passives, I used back in the first edition, which is now quite widespread. A lot of people, and still programming language books in other things, say something like, if the condition holds, this code is executed. That's passive.
Yeah.
Is executed by whom? By what?
Yeah.
I decided that it's much clearer to say, if the condition holds, this code executes.
Yeah. Yeah.
May seem like nothing, but it eliminated many dozens of passive verb forms.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about some of the changes that we made. Some hard decisions we had to make in trying to slim down the book. We are not covering async IO. It's too big, too important, and deserves a whole book of its own or a whole bookshelf of its own. The same with a lot of the third-party frameworks, Django, Flask, Pandas, PyTorch. Isn't Pandas supposed to be plural? TensorFlow, other things like that. They deserve books of their own. And so we tried to keep it to more core language stuff and leave those
Yeah,
other
part of the
things
problem,
to,
of course, if you do website in Django, and like there are 30 pages covering Flask, that's a waste for you, and vice versa. If you do websites in Flask and there's 300 pages covering Django, that's about the ratio. It needs about 10 times as much as Flask.
yeah.
Like, why would you buy a 2,000-page book of half of which describes frameworks you could care less about?
Right.
The same goes, say, in artificial intelligence for PyTorch versus TensorFlow.
Yeah.
People use one or the other. I don't know any project using both.
Yeah. Another thing that we decided was that there were two areas that were kind of moving targets. The first one is packaging. The Python Packaging Authority is keeping up to date on that, and they're awesome. Packaging, we basically tried to give the basics. It's an online only chapter. We have just a summary of it in the book itself and a link to the online chapter. And the same with extending and embedding, which, using C or whatever, extending and embedding is in such a state of flux that it made more sense to make it an online chapter. So a few things that we decided were easy decisions was to put up a GitHub repo for all the sample code from the book. And then Paul, our co-author, created a couple of really cool web pages where you can search through you give it a keyword like zone info, and it will tell you which PEP covers that particular new feature. Same for language changes by version. You put in zone info and it will tell you which version of Python zone info was brought into the language. And so that's kind of a couple of cool little things that are out there anybody can use. And the links are there. Let's talk about a few of our favorite things that we learned or came across as we were writing the book. This is, by the way, is our license plate, Python with the heart in the middle, because we love Python and Python brought us together. So my favorite thing that is new is the zone info module, which is from 3.9 and on. It is a concrete implementation of time zones that you can use with tzinfo for all of your date times. It internally uses the system time zone data, or if that's not possible, it'll use tz data, which on Windows you do need to probably pip install tz data, but once it's installed, you don't need to import it. It just uses it underneath in the background. You can use it to get a list of all the time zone names, all however many there are, so that you can get the exact correct spelling that you want. You know, is it camel case? Is it a dash? Is it, you know, all one word? It has one class, zone info, and I recommend that you just from zone info import zone info, the class, and use it that way. And here I just wanted to show it in use. So say you have a date time that you created for, say, oh, I don't know, an arbitrary date like May 4th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. And you accidentally created it in New York time, but we live in the Bay Area. And so I want to replace that time zone to be the Pacific time. So I can use d.replace, and it uses tz info equal to change that particular attribute to the America Los Angeles time zone. And now you can see what it looks like. It's the same time, still 6:30 p.m., but the time zone's been updated. Now, if I have a friend in Kathmandu that I want to invite to the this meeting, and I want to know what time would it actually be in Kathmandu, I can actually convert that date time to Kathmandu time. And you see here, you use as time zone, TZ equals zone info Asia Kathmandu, and you end up getting May 5th at 7:15 a.m. So it changes, it actually converts the time and date as needed for the new time zone. And so when you want to actually convert, you use as time zone. If you just want to display it with the same information, all the other attributes unchanged, you use replace. And Kathmandu is a cool one, David Mertz pointed out, because it's 5 hours and 45 minutes ahead of UTC. So that's kind of a cool one. Both of them return a new date time. Replace just updates whichever attribute you are replacing without changing any other attributes. You can use it to replace any other attributes you want. So, for example, if you wanted to change the hour to 7 p.m. and the minutes to 0, so that that date time is 7 o'clock instead of 6:30, you can do that. As time zone is only for converting to the new time zone, and it again returns a new date time. And if you notice, the keywords are different. Replace uses TZ info equals, whereas as time zone will not work with TZ info. It requires the keyword TZ equals. And no, I don't know why they did it that way, but they did. Alex, you're up.
Right. Trying to focus on something I really like. I couldn't really find it, nothing that important in very recent releases, but it came to prominence as we were writing the book. It's about Unicode. Text strings default to Unicode. This is an unalloyed good. It may end up costing you a few bytes, but not that many. If the typical encoding is UTF-8 and you're using only ASCII anyway, you will not spend any extra memory. However, at the same time as text strings were made to default to Unicode since back in 3.0, identifiers may contain Unicode. That was a decision I desperately tried to convince Guido to revert, but essentially the motivation was, well, Java has identifiers with Unicode, so we should too. I just don't see why. One of the big problems with identifiers with Unicode is that they get normalized.
Right.
Moreover, they get normalized out of the many normal forms of Unicode as NFKC, not NFC.
Whatever those mean.
Yeah, what is
Take
NFC,
6 months
NFK?
out of your life if you have any hope of not having disasters with Unicode. Take 6 months out of your life and study.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with the general idea of this is too complicated to care about.
Right.
The spec is too complicated, so
You
it's a
have to, as
Python
I'll
spec.
show.
Yeah.
PEP 672 highlights a few of the many ways in which you can deliberately or accidentally trip yourself up with Unicode. In particular, it's reasonably easy to write a script that looks like it's innocuous and is actually destructive.
Yeah.
Because of the problem of Unicode glyphs looking essentially identical in but
Yeah.
being different.
Yeah. We've got a couple slides on that coming up.
Yeah.
So let's whoop. So one of the cool things that Paul brought to our attention is the middle dot is a valid identifier character. It's not the period, it's the middle dot. It's not valid as a leading character. And you might run into some debugging problems because of the visual similarity between middle dot and the regular period or dot that we are used to. But it can be nice for formatting some identifiers like a phone number. Because you may or may not be working with a language where you can use a dash in phone number, or you might not want to use an underscore. Alex, you had some attitudes about the middle dot.
Yeah. It's more general than that. The motivation for allowing arbitrary, well, not arbitrary, but a lot of Unicode characters and identifiers is so that programmers whose native language is not English can use identifiers in their own native languages. You know what? English is my third language, as I said, and yet I would never dream of using, say, accented character as in Italian or French as identifiers, because I know that would make it completely unreadable to somebody who doesn't speak French or Italian. Before I immigrated in this country about 18 years ago, a question I was often asked at meetups and conferences in Italy and other places in Europe is, what is the most important language to learn to be an effective programmer? People expected me to say Python or maybe C. I said English.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more important to become an effective programmer. if you're ready English speakers, you may not realize that, but
Yeah.
it's really, really crucial.
Yeah, we have the privilege of having grown up with the language that a lot of the books are originally written in, a lot of the documentation. Speaking of books, this
The
is
normalization issue
yeah.
is why were you exactly why we ended up with NFAC, I don't know, but we did. So it's based on equivalence as incompatibility. So for example, a normal lowercase a versus a superscript lowercase a normalize, so to speak, to the same character. So suppose you're trying to use to assign values to identifiers A and O and superscript A and superscript O. Python will be happy to do that, but the second assignment actually overrides the plain A and plain O.
Yeah.
Because
It thinks it's the same letter.
A maps to regular A.
Yeah. Another example that we came up with, these are the same script. Alex refers to this as the ransom note version of Python. And Paul actually set up a website where you can put in a script and it will come up with these crazy variants of the different fonts so that it looks pretty much like a ransom note.
So how is that possible? Is it just by using these Unicode characters?
Yeah, so here you can see all these 18
sure.
Unicode characters normalized to the same capital A, but not the capital alpha. The Greek capital letter alpha does not normalize to A.
And that is part of the problem, as PEP 672 will explain to you, because in just about all fonts I've ever seen, uppercase Greek capital alpha and uppercase Latin letter A look identical.
Yeah, so try debugging that.
Yeah.
It's
now, in a corporate development environment, there's going to be rules saying don't do that, and you're going to get slapped across the face the first time you try that.
yeah, you're gonna have a lot of fun debugging if you have somebody being cute or thinking they're doing something helpful by using these other things. But yeah, so it's mostly just a warning. We have big this is actually a screenshot from the book where we have the scorpion as warnings for things to watch out for that can be gotchas. And that was one of them that we ran across.
So,
another one gotcha that we ran across is L strip and R strip, left strip and right strip. Might remove more than you want. So if, for example, you use L strip on this URL and you think it's just going to remove the prefix, what it does is it removes every one of those characters that it finds in the https:// it removes every one of those characters. So you end up with L.com. But we got a fix for that in 3.9. Remove prefix and remove suffix will do what you probably wanted there, which is to just remove the prefix and return the shell.com. So that's something you might want to go back and look through your code and find out if you have some of these things that are removing more than you had intended them to.
Incidentally, I don't know if we already mentioned that, but that 3.9 in black background and so on is exactly how in the book we mark what versions is a certain thing we're saying good for.
Yeah.
3.9 plus means 3.9 and succeeding versions.
Yeah.
So if you're for some reason constrained to programming 3.8, you don't have access to that. And similarly for things that get deprecated in more recent versions.
Yeah. So Alex, you want to talk about this one?
Sure. This is just one of the many anomalies with floats. It's not a new thing. I think it behaves this way in every version of Python.
Yeah, I think this was just one of the things Paul found out when he was working on the
double checking and triple checking, always saying, there are integers. Integers will use all the memory available, and so can represent many more values accurately than floats can, because floats are limited to 53 bits. In so-called Mantissa significantly. Another discovery by Paul, which we're cribbing on, building Python from source exactly as you want it is not trivial. Somebody did a little website which lets you do a few clicks to choose Python version, enable or disable a few options, and generates a bash script for you. You can copy it to your dashboard with a single click and paste it into the editor of your choice. And this isn't good just for Linux, but also for the WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, which current versions of Windows let you install. Don't know if you are aware of that, but you can have a Linux kernel running in parallel and cooperating with the Windows kernel. So anything you can do in Linux, you can now do in Windows with WSL. And this includes building Python from source. Oh, this isn't an actionable thing, it's just fun. There is one algorithm ever mentioned by name in the history of the Supreme Court of the United States. That algorithm is TimSort, named after its author, Tim Peters, also known as the Timbot.
Right.
The court, Oracle had sued Google about Google's release of Java for Android phones and tablets, and claiming there had been copying of the source code. The court determined that this wasn't the case, with a single exception, TimSort.java, the Java version of TimSort. And for that, they awarded Oracle a reimbursement of $0.00.
That's
so
silly.
Google was guilty of copying that file, and therefore owed $0 to Oracle. I think we paid it. I have the background story of that. One of the several Python Software Foundation fellows who are Google employees was presenting this new sorting algorithm in a technical talk inside of Google. Sitting right in the front row was Joshua Bloch, one of the world's Java gurus at the time, also a Google employee. And as the logic and the effectiveness of these algorithms were explained, his eyes lit on fire. He whipped out his laptop and started hacking. At the end of that tech talk, Tim sort had been coded in Java for Java. And that's what eventually
Yeah.
led, so the copyright of that ended up with Oracle when Oracle bought Sun and so on, but it had been written by a Google employee at a Google Tech Talk, like real time.
Yeah. I just want to mention that a portion of our royalties are donated to the PSF. So that's been our practice all along for both Python in a Nutshell and the Python cookbooks that we were involved in. Speaking of royalties, we get them from selling the book. We did manage to negotiate a discount code of 40% off for if you buy it from Google Play. And the reason that we ended up going with that was we could get a much better discount for people to get, and B, it works all over the world. The one that we could get for Amazon only worked in the US, and same with their Safari one.
I
Apparently
don't remember
only
how
worked
much
in,
it was, but definitely less than 40%.
yeah, more like 10%.
All these negotiations are actually done by O'Reilly.
Yeah, so
That owns the copyright, not by
Yeah.
the authors, but still.
yeah. And we're hoping to, I'm working with a couple people about trying to get book signings in the Bay Area, that at places that people might be attending the North Bay Python. I'm hoping to have a book signing up there for us. So if you get a book, you can bring it and we'll sign it, and we might have a few that we can give out as well. And if Pi Bay happens, we will be there doing book signings there. And we're open for Q&A. And I'm just going to leave this slide up if that's okay, so people can get the code for themselves, write it down or type it in their computers or whatever.
Optionally, you can look at the chat. I have transcribed it there.
Awesome. Thank you. And we're done with our official presentation part, so we're opening it up to Q&A. Oh, and by the way, one thing, Alex and I have managed to write, is it 4 books now together or 5? Alex?
Officially 4, but in practice, in the second edition of the Nutshell, to all intents and purposes, you were a co-author, except O'Reilly didn't let me credit
My
you
name
on
wasn't on the book.
the
So
time.
I just want to say that the fact that we've managed to write 5 books together and we're still together is pretty good testament to our relationship. If you can survive
that's
that
actually-
together, you can survive anything.
There's a very small community of husband and wife pairs who write technical books together.
Mhm.
And I believe it was Andrew Koenig in particular out of this small community who once explained, if you ever want to make sure that your marriage is rock solid, put it to the hardest of tests, write a book together. If when the book is published, you are still together, the marriage is absolutely indestructible.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I'm glad you two have kept it together and continue to publish. Can we expect a 5th edition, or are you looking
Maybe
for...
from Paul.
Okay.
We're
Well,
going to be handing it to the younger generation at this point.
Well, it seems like you've got a good team, so you don't even need to worry about passing the torch.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, three of us on the team are towards the end of our careers, so Steve Olden, me, and to some extent Anna as well.
Yeah.
Paul is the one who will have to carry the torch.
Yeah. Yeah, he's the youngster on the team.
So ransom note Python is something I just never ever thought about before.
Right?
So for Alex, I'm assuming that in Google and other places he's worked, they had rules so that if you're not following a coding convention, people just aren't going to approve your check-in. Is that accurate?
That is pretty correct. The point is that adopting a language and then restricting actual use to a subset of the language is something that Google is used to because C++. They, especially you think back of C++ as it stood 20 years ago, Google C++ style guide allowed the use of about 2/3 of the language because certain aspects were just too complicated and they didn't work right in most compilers and so on and so forth. That did not used to be the case for Python. It now is because of the Unicode identifiers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess this might be what is it? The Paul is the new guy for Python in a nutshell. I envision a big value add is using something like Sphinx with search backend for later editions of the book, so that you can filter on language version features, for instance, or deprecations, or filter against them, as well as do, searches, because the Python in a nutshell is sort of a manual, code manual, as well as, how to. And Sphinx is a somewhat used documentation tool in the Python community primarily. Have you seen stuff like that happening out in the wild for technical books in Python or any other languages?
And while this linear idea would work for most areas, there are a few which are problematic in themselves where I don't know how. The one that immediately springs to my mind, again by contrast with C++, is eval. Eval in Python are a mess.
Yes.
Let's be perfectly honest. There's many versions that were introduced and are now deprecated. You can have an eval based on strings, an eval based on bitmaps, an eval based on consecutive integers. It can be or not be interchangeable. Again, everything comes and goes with versions. That's compared with a class enum construct of C++11 and following versions. C++ is much simpler. That's something I would never have dreamed to say 20 years ago as an expert of both Python and C++. But C++, if you use it by C++11 or even better C++20, but compilers don't fully support it mostly yet, they will, become simpler. In certain aspects, evals are the big sore point for me.
I guess that could be something that says, if there are any eval statements in the code, try again.
The point is, enum are useful, but the concept of having 7 different kinds defeats the idea of simplicity.
Yeah.
You should pick one kind and stick with it.
There should be one way to do things.
Should be done at the language level instead of continuing to accommodate other. And let's not even get into the fact that the enum keyword and the enumerate built-in have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Getting Python beginners to understand that is like, why are they named that way then? It's really hard because I can't find a good reason.
Yeah. So Woody, if you would like, I can email you a PDF of the presentation that you can post somewhere for people to download, because I know some people would like a transcript-ish thing. I don't think we do a transcript from the recording, but at least they would have the slide deck.
Yeah, that would be great. I would happily link that.
Don't the caption end up in the recorded?
I do believe this is creating captions, so should be okay on that. But my philosophy is always more is better in those cases. So if we've got a PDF, I'll link it in the YouTube.
Great.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not familiar with Zoom because, as I kind of mentioned, I'm an 18-year-old tenured employee at Google, so I'm kind of biased towards Google Meet, where the captioning facilities is very rich and well integrated.
Yeah. Any other questions or answers?
Well, I'm a big fan of anything in the space industry. Obviously, I've talked in the past about a holiday I created called Mars Day. So it got me to thinking when you brought up that module about time zones, how to integrate that same transcription process where you go from the New York time zone to the Los Angeles time zone to the time zone on a planet that has a different clock for the day. I believe the difference between the Martian day and the Earth day is 37 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
And so while I understand it's not practically important, be curious how one might go about surmounting
well,
that
first
particular
you'd have
issue.
to get it into the Olson database. And if you got it in there, then it would be fine. You'd be perfectly happy, because that's what Python relies on for all of its time zone conversions.
I don't know if the algorithms represented in that database can have any sensible way of dealing with days of different length.
And there is that.
I mean, there are all sort of weirdnesses in time zones, but at least I believe they all refer to a 24-hour day.
Well, we would have to wait and fix that once we've got people there deciding what the time zones are in Mars.
No, it must be done earlier. You know, my colleague Windsurf is very close to with a lot of other engineers working with him to having an interplanetary internet standard. There's all sort of interesting stuff, you know, because the various points move. There's a measurable delay with a packet at the speed of light can arrive to the next node, and
Talk
so
about
on.
lag.
Huh?
Talk about lag time.
Yeah, I don't know if the standard in progress deal at all with time zone issues.
Well, they'd have to have timestamps, so they got to figure it out somehow.
Well, they could be in a single unified. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's actually a really interesting thing you brought up, is this idea of this standard for communications between different planets.
Oh yeah.
And cursory search shows me that the Olson database, that's maintained by IBM.
Could be. I don't remember.
Maybe it's just them reporting on it. Yeah, I'm looking at the documentation. It looks like IBM. Yeah, I guess they'll have to update the typo in their name. They'll have to become Yeah, because international is no longer accurate. They'd have to be interplanetary business machines.
Right.
I think there was a satellite that was sent to the moon like a few years ago to test high-speed communication between Earth and Moon. There was like some new protocol.
Yeah. Yeah, now they call it the TZ database, I guess. And it's run by ICANN, so who knows? Appropriate that we're talking about this on May the 4th.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. On a less technical note, I noticed throughout your career, Alex, you've had some bodacious hair choices. If we look at your Wikipedia, you have an awesome mustache. Today, you've got a mullet.
The mustache was actually, although the Wikipedia doesn't explain it, a result of a bet with my late father as a World Soccer Championship was starting. He expressed a certainty that Italy would make it at least to the final and maybe win the championship. And I said, yeah, right. So we made a bet, and the loser would have to grow a mustache.
Right.
I lost
And he
because
did.
Italy won the World Championship that year. And so for the next 4 years, until fortunately Italy lost it again, 4 years later, I went around like a walrus.
Uh-huh. It was cute.
Where did that flag come from? Or that poster of the like sun python?
Where was that? Was that Singapore?
Yeah, it was somewhere in Buenos Aires. At
Oh,
Cafe
Buenos
Conf.
Aires. Okay. Yeah.
Cafe Conf, because that Cafe is the Capital Federal, the district, central district of Buenos Aires is a huge sprawl. We were
Very
invited to keynote the Argentinian Cafe Conf.
Yeah.
So Anna, you've sorry to interrupt.
Oh
Did you
yeah,
have
it
more
was
on that?
Argentina.
Yeah,
Nice.
I love it.
Yeah.
So Anna, you've spoken a bunch, as is Alex, but some of your topics stood out. I watched a few of them earlier in this week to prepare for tonight. One stood out to me: cognitive bias in the Python community. I believe it was a speech you did at EuroPy.
Yeah.
I'm curious how can, like, the goal was to generate a sense of inclusiveness and point out that women have a pretty notable space in the history of computing, and then also pointing out that there are many underrepresented groups in this space. And I find that the change from an in-person event to an online event has allowed for a dramatic increase in inclusiveness. I'm wondering, how can I continue to increase our inclusiveness? I do worry sometimes that we're not representing enough of some communities.
Well, I think that, getting more speakers who are from those various communities is helpful, so that people see that they're not just there to fill in the numbers. They're not just there for, token representation. They're actually being taken seriously as part of the community. Also reaching out and asking the members that do show up and, letting them know. I think that your code of conduct is awesome. And having that at the beginning of every meeting is really helpful to just reassure people that this is should be a comfortable space, and that everyone's welcome here and everyone is valued here. I've been seeing a lot of the conferences are doing a great job at bringing in new people and new voices. from all over the world, not just more women, but people of color. And I think that's an area that we really need to work more on. But just being aware of our own biases is important, and the fact that we all have them. That's just how brains work. And so being aware of it and then doing what we can to overcome those biases consciously is important. And just treating everyone with respect. So.
I love that. Well, we're not done yet, but to that end, if anyone has any ideas for topics they want to present on in the future, we are always open. And, you know, to people that have presented regularly, we love our sustainers, but we're always open to newcomers. So
one of the things that I do like to encourage people to present who haven't before is to be aware that, you know, at a place like this, the SacPy, the Bay Piggies, the local user groups, people want you to succeed and people want to hear about stuff you're excited about. And that's what makes you an effective speaker, not whether you've done 80 billion presentations in the past or whether you wrote the book on the subject. It's whether you are excited about the topic. And I love to hear someone who is coming to a topic from a new perspective. They didn't write the module. They're not inside the head of the person who wrote the module. They're just trying to use it for something cool. And they're going to be the ones who are going to notice the issues that the developer of that module never even thought of. And so they're going to be able to push the conversation forward and make it a better module, and also help all of those other people who are having that same problem and thinking, I'm the only one, I must be, you know, too stupid to program or whatever. Helping those people realize that we all run into problems with modules, with programs, with debugging things. We all have issues. And I love to see presentations from people who are saying, well, this didn't work well. I had this problem and this is how I overcame it. And I love those. And a lot of newer people can bring up stuff. Packaging. I remember one of my early talks was on packaging in Python. And what I did was, it was in DC at PyCon. I got up and I said, okay, this is how they say it's supposed to work. And I've got a row of experts in the back that I brought in, and I'm going to tell you how it's supposed to work. And then we're going to go through and critique this because it doesn't work that way. And get those experts to actually answer us as to how does it actually work and how do we fix these problems that we're having with the difference between the documentation and how it actually worked in practice. And some things got fixed after that. So, yeah.
that's awesome. It's like a panel, but kind of in reverse, more like a firing squad.
No, we were all
No.
working together as
Well,
a
we're shooting the
community to
issues.
fix it.
Shooting the issues, not people.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, to that end, if anyone is still a little nervous about potentially presenting, I'd like to point out Tanim has introduced a number of months ago into our process. The day before, we'll do kind of a dress rehearsal and workshop any presentations. I'm always happy to help anyone add any structure or streamline aspects of their presentations, and you know, just generally let you do a practice run before you jump up. Now, Alex and Anna didn't have to do that tonight because they've done this sort of thing a million times. But use this as a practice ground. If you've got a demo coming up at work and you're allowed to share about it, but you also want to get a little practice in, this would be a good place to do it. If you're at a smaller location, you may not have to get permission. It could also be an interesting time to promote your business and maybe even get some new customers or possibly even recruit some talent. All right, so let's see. I got a list of questions here about Python stuff. What advice would either of you give to Python developers that are looking to contribute to any like open source project?
So
Alex?
one thing I've observed is in general, for an open source project, it's much easier to find enthusiastic volunteer to hack on code, much harder once to do documentation and tutorials. And
True.
in particular, it's almost prohibitive to find people volunteering to do Jupyter notebooks, which are the best way to present tutorials on so many things. So if you want to be enthusiastically accepted by any open source projects community, learn to write Jupyter notebooks and volunteer tutorial Jupyter notebooks, or even just other kind of documentation, because it's a question of demand and supply. There's a lot of demand for such docs and much less supply than for code hacking.
Yeah, getting good docs is huge. So that's really helpful. And they will love you.
Yeah, that's really good information right there.
All right, I've got a bunch more questions, but I want to give other people an opportunity to jump in if they've got anything they want to ask about.
I'd love to hear from some of the newer people too.
Hey, this is Cynthia and Robert here.
Hey there.
Hi.
We were wondering, are there any resources that you might suggest for writing documentation, maybe books that you used as y'all were kind of putting your material together? Kind of also in regards to that open source project question you just answered.
Read the docs is a big, is a really important way of doing documentation. And I think that's, they've got a tutorial you can go through and use that to get more up to speed on how to do it well.
Awesome, thanks.
I wish I could suggest something equivalent for Jupyter notebooks, but I really can't. I don't know anybody who's really written a tutorial on how to properly code a Jupyter notebook to serve as documentation. The reason I'm harping on that is many moons ago, Donald Knuth invented the concept he called literate programming, which would be mixed in with text so that it would read like a scientific paper, but still be executable, that, as opposed to like a piece of code with bunches of comments where code is 90%, the comments are just there. He used, I think, Pascal for the code, and Tech, his own creation for the documentation part, the text part, but that's not particularly important. In Jupyter Notebook, you'll be using Markdown, much simpler than Tech, and Python, but it's still the realization of this dream after so many decades. That's how I view it.
Thanks.
In the past, Tanim has presented on a module called Sphinx. It's a documentation generator. I'm curious what your opinion is on that, if you have any experience with it.
I
Snake.
don't.
Sphinx. The
Oh,
Sphinx.
Sphinx.
Yes.
I haven't used it like that, but I've seen references to it. Alex, I think that they use different things inside Google that are proprietary. So, yeah. Sorry.
No worries.
I've never seen a tool do as good a job as like just a human being setting down. Because there's one thing is a reference document. Okay, there's this class with these methods which do this job. That doesn't teach you as a newcomer to the project how best to use it. Essentially, it's
All right.
not a teaching material.
Yeah. I think Paul might have mentioned it in the book at some point, but I'm not really familiar with it myself.
To that end, generative AI has been really, all the rage lately.
Yeah.
Obviously, everyone's heard about ChatGPT. Google has its own thing, Bard. I've been playing around with that. Definitely spits out globs of data way faster than ChatGPT. But I think it's well known that there is some inaccuracy sometimes in what it is putting out. Certainly a lack of robustness. It's effectively it's a summarization, but also something of a synthesis of any related topics or related answers to the particular question. And so do you see that ever getting to a point where we could replace a human writer, or do you think we're safe in that? Thus far, I'm thinking what I've seen, we've still got some time here on Earth as useful contributors.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of stuff from it, and just no. I think we're safe. It's really good at grabbing random bits of stuff that are theoretically related and regurgitating it and making it sound good until you actually read it and go, wait, what? And it makes stuff up out of whole cloth. What I'm most concerned about with it is when it starts making things up and people start believing it. That really concerns me. So, yeah, we have enough so-called fake news, actual real fake news to worry about, that we don't need AI to create more for us.
Yeah, super speed fake news.
Yeah.
Well, if nothing else, it's all trained on previously human written information, and so it begs more of that, I would say. It doesn't, I think many people are concerned, oh, we're going to supplant the need for human authors. But at this point, it's not actually generating anything particularly new. It's simply summarizing what exists.
Yeah. One of the big issues is the black box problem, not knowing where and how it's biased. Why is it coming up with these answers, these decisions, and how do we make sure that it isn't just bringing out stuff that's biased because it's been reading stuff that was biased?
So I just posted to the chat the link through which you can
Peter
find
Norvig.
what?
Peter
yeah.
Norvig, yeah.
It's not exactly about generative model in particular, because it's 3 years ago or so. Peter Norvig, the director of research at Google and old personal friend, has thought and presented this idea, which he titles "As We May Program." The obvious for those of us who are way into the history of computing link is to Vannevar Bush, As We May Think, in the late 40s, which essentially previewed information retrieval as a crucial part of a knowledge worker's toolkit in the future. All the details are wrong. All the technical details in Vannevar Bush, for example, the information is stored in microfiche. I don't know if you ever use those, but definitely they're out of fashion. But it doesn't matter. The core point, which Peter's critique serves well, is thinking of an AI system as a replacement for the human worker is completely wrong and a broken model. He shows it by what was state of the art, but that state of the art at the company that's at the forefront of artificial intelligence work, that's us, Google, 3 years ago. But the concept is much more general than that.
Mm-hmm.
The use of such tools to augment our capacity so we can do work that is twice as good in half the time, that is the secret key that we need to address. That's Peter's case. If you don't know, Peter Norvig is also the author of the most widespread textbook on artificial intelligence. He used to have all the examples in Lisp. In the latest version, they're all in Python.
He's also
as the language used in artificial intelligence.
Yeah, he's also a Stanford fellow on covering AI. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that assessment of where AI is. There's always going to be doom and gloom for any given new technology that comes out. But I've mentioned this in the past. My training is in cognitive science, and I specialized in human computer interaction.
Awesome.
And so this has always been top of mind for me. I got into that space for my interest in artificial intelligence in high school. And I guess
so you know more about this than I do.
I don't know necessarily, but it seems we can have an interesting conversation about it. I find that augmentation is the best case scenario. When I was in school, I was on the swim team, and my best analogy, and maybe this isn't the most apropos since not everyone swims, but I think anyone who has swam before has likely swam with fins on their feet. And when you get in and swim, it's a very counterintuitive thing to the human form. We are simply not hydrodynamic. And even if you're good at it, working hard at it is still kind of boring because you're basically just drowning while doing aerobic work and staring at a black line. But for some reason, when you put fins on the one hand, or on the one foot, you do go a lot faster. But on the other hand, I found I end up doing a lot more work because it's more fun to go faster. And so I think AI is, in a sense, has the potential to be that sort of augmentation where you, by introducing it into your work cycle, you're allowing yourself to go faster, and if nothing else, bringing it to sort of a neuroscience terms, you're not taxing your short-term memory as much because things aren't falling out of your registers because you're closing the loop faster. Maybe you're not getting a full robust solution, but that's what you're tasked with as the individual, and it's up to you to break down the problems and explain them in cogent terms. And once upon a time, we may have talked about a rubber ducky, that being a system where you try to explain something. Because anytime you explain something to someone about, oh, I'm having a hard time doing this, often just by trying to frame it in terms of something they might understand, you solve the problem. And so if
I
anyone's
often
unfamiliar,
play rubber ducky for Alex. And
nice.
Offloading the things, offloading stuff from our brain is really helpful. I have an issue of time blindness. I don't notice time like passing as such. So I can tell you that I have an appointment at 7 p.m. on Thursday night. But unless I set an alarm on my phone to say, hello, it's almost that time, I'm going to miss that appointment. And so offloading all of that kind of busy work is great for me. People are like, oh, you're giving up. And it's like, no, I'm actually accomplishing more because I don't have to worry about missing appointments. Now I can think about the important stuff I want to think about. If we can use AI to do that for us so that we can focus on the stuff we want to focus on, I'm all for it, as long as people are aware of, keeping an eye on what we're actually using it for.
Back to the rubber ducky effect, I recommend a quote by the great American author Richard Bach. We teach best what we most need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
That's from the book I personally consider Bach's masterpiece, The Adventures of Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. Some people prefer Jonathan Livingston Seagull. You will not waste your time if you attack any of his novels, but try Illusions for a humanistic side view of the kind of things we're discussing.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And in that link that you shared previously, the Peter Norvig article, they talked a little bit about the first project that really came out of DeepMind. It was the AlphaGo project. Back in the 90s, IBM had this supercomputer. I won't say it's much of an AI thing. It was really more of an expert system that beat Gary Kasparov in chess. And at that time, that was a huge achievement. Right? Yeah, a huge achievement. Deep Blue was what it was. Huge achievement, but they also went on to say, yeah, but sure, if you look at structured, perfect information games, this would never touch Go because the possibilities are simply too great. And I think it was in early 2016 or maybe late 2015, the current grandmaster of Go, Lee Sedol, out of Korea, was beaten by Google DeepMind's AlphaGo. And since then, AlphaGo has been beaten. I forget who the new guy is, but he effectively learned from it. That augmentation of the sport as a whole, or the game as a whole, led people to become more creative. I've seen recent articles about how that's been sort of a quote unquote contagion in the community, is creativity has been renewed, because at that time, it was basically this just statistically perfect game that was played. And now they've found the edge and corner cases in the AlphaGo thing. I seem to recall something about a player that identified basically errors in its programming, or maybe I guess it's in its training. It's not an expert system. It kind of learned itself.
Cool.
And yeah, and so I don't know if anyone's doom and gloom about AI. At least talk to me. I'm pretty optimistic about it.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Do either of you like Kurt Vonnegut?
Oh, yeah.
Player piano, I think, is apropos to this. There was a checker playing machine, and the main guy ends up beating it because he could recognize the programming as he was going along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's Mike from the Moon is a Harsh Mistress. But sorry, old highlight fan here.
Okay, I will need to be going in about 5 minutes. So if there's some question I should specifically address, maybe we can bring it to
Alex
the
is
front.
going to turn into a pumpkin soon.
Well, that's quite all right.
I'm a very morning person.
No problem. Well, I think this is a good time to start wrapping things up. Once again, thank you so much for joining. Great presentation. I'm glad to hear that both of you have made it through as many books. No pressure, but we hope to see more. But if not, you've left an amazing legacy. So thank you both. I hope to see you again in the future. If not, maybe we'll see you in Mountain View or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or up at Pie Bay North or whatever, North Bay Python or whatever they're called. Some of the
Perfect.
upcoming conferences.
Yeah, or Pie Bay. I'm friends with Grace.
There's one up in Petaluma at the end of July.
Perfect.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll be able to connect with people up there.
Excellent. Well,
Okay.
Thanks for the invite, Woody.
thanks for coming.
Bye. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Not all.
Nice to meet you all.
And thanks for everyone showing up. Thanks for the questions. And we'll see you first Thursday in June. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks.